Hi y'all, welcome to my shop. I'm getting ready to teach a class on pepper mills at Woodcraft, and I thought as I turned this pepper mill using the materials that I'm going to be using in class, I thought I'd make a video of it. So, we're using a Wood River pepper mill kit. I think this is made by Chef Specialties, but I wouldn't swear to it. But one of the beauties of it is it's got multiple shafts for different sizes, and there's some advantages to that. I'll go into that a little bit later. In this particular class, we're using blanks provided by Woodcraft. They're already pre-drilled, which makes it very handy. It also makes it a little more expensive if you've got the capability of drilling a hole. But if you don't have the capability of drilling a 1-inch hole all the way through a blank, or you don't have good access to wood, this is certainly an effective option, and it's very convenient in class. So we can dispense with the drilling, which might be a challenge on a midi lathe like we're going to be using in class. So this blank happens to be made out of cherry. First thing we're going to do is drill with a 1-inch hole with a 1 5/8 inch hole at the bottom. So we're going to start with this block that we're going to use for a glue block. It's a piece of poplar that was cut green, and it's been in my shop for a little while, so it's fairly dry, although it's probably still considered green. So we're going to mark the center on both ends like that. We're going to bring up I'm going to use a steb center. That's the one with the little teeth on it. It's my preferred one I like to use. And then we're going to use bring up our live center. Good. Let's bring this up, tighten it up a little bit. We're going to use a spindle roughing gouge. That's this big gouge right here that's ground straight across. It can be different sizes. The 3/4 is not a bad size. This one's a little bit bigger than that. Turn it, make sure it clears, and then let's go ahead and turn it around. I'm going to get the speed up a little bit. Now I'm going to put a tenon on this that matches the chuck I'm going to be using, which is going to be the same ones we're going to be using in class. That's the Nova. Supernova 2. Bring that up. Come straight in. Since this is poplar, you want to come straight in on that parting cut before you drop the handle. Otherwise you get a little frayed image there. I could probably show you that. If I come in, if I drop this right here, let me show you that. If you take a peeling cut first, you could get these frayed edges on some woods like poplar and pine and some others. But once you get that initial cut started, then you can drop it. So, alright, so now I've got a tenon on here. I can go ahead and put this in the chuck. Hold it in firmly. Around and tighten it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to mount our mill head, but before we do that, the most important thing you can do is take a pencil and mark the grain to make sure you've got it. Already taken this part, it comes with a strap. Make sure you've got the grain matched on here. Okay, I've got the grain matched, and mark it. And because you don't want, especially on this mill head, you want to mark the bottom and the top so you don't get confused and get them backwards and mess up that grain match. So that'll prevent any confusion. There's not going to be confusion with this because it's got a larger hole drilled in the bottom. It's got a 1-inch hole all the way through and a 1 5/8 inch hole drilled a 1/2 inch on this pre-drilled blank. So how this is going to be the bottom. This is going to be the bottom. This is going to be where we're going to have a tenon. So how do we fasten it on here? The way we're going to do that is we're going to use some turner's tape. So let me show you how that works. This is the approach I started with, and it's the one I used for this pepper mill I'm showing here. But as I continued to prepare for the class and actually went through a class, the better way is to actually turn a drive center with a 1/4 inch spigot. and I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. And you can this approach works. It holds it on one end, so you can remove tailstock support. But you can see the problem is going to be shaping that back side. You can do the tenon on the front toward the tailstock side, but you can have a hard time shaping the back side. And the approach that I'm going to show you, it works even better. For a pre-drilled blank, I found it a challenge to use the original equipment drive that we find in the classroom, because it doesn't sit in there, it doesn't center on that hole. So the way to solve that is you take your waste block, turn a little 1/4 inch or whatever it is to match your drilled hole, and use that as a driver, and that works just real well. Sometimes how you chuck is a function of what equipment you have, and I started off using that idea of using double-sided tape because I didn't think in class we would have enough set of jaws to do it the way that I prefer to do it. But let me show you a couple of alternatives. I think for the easiest way to do it is actually put a tenon on that mill head, and that way you can mount it in here. You've got this access free. You can shape this down to final shape while it's chucked up. You can drill a hole all the way through it. You can do your recess. Now the issue you get is, how do you shape it? Here you could go ahead and shape it here, but then what I would do, I've got a couple of different alternatives that I want to show you. So there's a couple of ways to hold this, to remove this tenon and to do this final shape. One is you make a little collet chuck like this. I've shown these before. This is in grain or spindle orientation with a couple of bandsaw slot. It goes in there, in with that slot. Stick this in and tighten it up. And it's not going to be as strong as obviously your steel scroll chuck jaws, but it's going to be close enough. You can bring up, obviously you can bring up your cone center for a little while if you need it. To shape this over until you get to the final little cleanup on the bottom, and then you go ahead and remove this. The other approach you can take is to use a chuck with a smaller set of jaws. So with this set of jaws, I can do this and round off this edge as well. Another approach I used, if they didn't get this completely rounded off or they wanted to change the shape again, they could turn it between centers. We could also make a little small 1/4 inch waste block driver. The other approach that works well in a classroom setting, that's easier to make than this, because this takes a little more effort. You've either got to pre-make them for everybody in the class, but they can actually take a waste block and drill a 1-inch hole or whatever is appropriate for the design, and make a jam chuck, and this works very well to be able to turn off the end of it to do the top. And you can use tailstock, again, you can use tailstock support as long as you need. Okay, I hope I don't confuse y'all with too many different alternatives, but you know, I like to show different ways to do it for different people with different pieces of equipment. So the approaches I showed you earlier, using a collet chuck, using a jam chuck, those work fine. Let me show you an even simpler approach, and this is one that I used effectively in class. You use that drive that you turned with the 1/4 inch tenon or whatever fits the hole, and you can use that to actually turn your mill head, bringing up either your 60-degree cone, and you can reverse it for either way. You want to make this large enough where you can get a nice tenon on it, but you want to get it smaller than the size of your
mill head in order that you can shape it and bring it around. Now in this case, you start bringing it around here and you start running into problems. But let me show you how that works. Now if you don't have a 60-degree cone, you can always turn your a wooden one, and I'll have a link to a video on that. You just make it snug where it'll fit inside your live center. But in this case, this doesn't, because this goes on my Laguna, MIDI Laguna, it will not fit on my full size because it's a little shorter Morse taper. Okay, so I'm going to use a regular 60-degree cone, which is not a problem at all because, for example, coming in here, I've got lots of room to turn that mill head around. Let me just give you an example. Lock everything down. Now, as you can see, when you start coming in on the back side, you're going to start running into that tenon that you need to remove. So how do you deal with that? Simple. You just turn it around. Have that be the drive on that side. Bring this up, and with a 60-degree cone, you've got lots of room to get around. You can see that you've got lots of room to come around and incorporate that tenon in your design. And if you're making it round, no problem when you turn it away. And you can get close enough to that 60-degree cone without too much concern, because that area at the very end is going to be covered up with your knob, or you can do a little simple hand sanding. So that's how this works. But that jam chuck does work well to give you the full access to this side that you otherwise couldn't do without that 60-degree cone. By the way, here's an alternative to turning a wooden jam driver. If you happen to have an Axminster fan pull, I'm not sure this is justification for buying one, but if you have one, this will also work very well because that 1/4 inch hole fits very snugly on there with a tapered shoulder, and that's another way to deal with it.
Now, a lot of new turners want to just put a piece of wood here and start turning, but I think that's a bad idea. I urge people to have a design when they have in mind for a spindle project like this. You can go out on the internet, Pinterest.com. You get lots of great ideas for a lot of wood turning projects, but I did some research there for pepper mill designs and came up with some. Then I believe in converting it to a storyboard, especially if you feel like you're going to turn more than one. So this is something that students may use in class. I want to take the time to make that storyboard to mark the key dimensions. So right here is where, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it around first. Let's just do that. Then we will start applying the key features. So again, bringing back that spindle roughing gouge. Anchor the tool, ride the bevel, lift till it cuts. Let's get the speed up. So we're going to take our storyboard and mark this shape on top. Now we've got a little extra here that we're going to have to get rid of, because this only needs the part that goes into the body is only going to be about 3/8 inch long, 66 millimeters thick. I find it millimeters easier to work with on a lot of projects. So close enough. Okay. So we're going to, this is going to be the end of the mill. This is going to be the bottom of the ball. So that's where we're going to take this tenon down, or create a tenon right here. I'm going to do that using a beading and parting tool, but actually in class we're not going to have a beading and parting tool, so they could do this with a spindle gouge, they could do it with a spindle roughing gouge. I would probably encourage most of them to use a spindle roughing gouge up on its edge like this. This is one of the reasons why it's so great to have this straight across, so you can take this peeling cut. We're going to make this just about an inch thick. I'm going to switch to a skew as a negative rate scraper and slightly chamfer this in just a little bit so the outside will sit flat. Now I probably ought to change this dimension to 1 inch, maybe just a little bit more than 1 inch, so then we can fine tune it. And the way we're going to fine tune it is we can actually check it against this 1 inch hole. Some plans call for 1 1/16 inch. I think 1 inch is plenty big. Whoa, way too loose. Fortunately, this is a lot longer than it needs to be, so it's not going to be a problem. This hole is actually just a hair bigger than an inch. You do want to sneak up on it because you don't want it a sloppy fit. And take your time on this step because you want this to be a good fit. So now I can take this down to the front and then start that excessive approximation by doing that little taper again at the front. Okay, so now it's twisting on. We can see where the burnish mark is, and then bring the rest of it down to fit. And we're going to use a thin parting tool. Want as little friction on here as possible. I could use a larger tool, but they're going to have smaller ones in the shop, and this is less friction. Fishtail back and forth so it doesn't bind. And then I'm just going to take just a tiny little chamfer there on the edge. Slow the speed down a little bit. And that takes care of that. Now the next step is kind of a luxury, but I say a luxury, it's a step that I think will give you a little nicer fit. And so I'm going to take off that little bit of scrap, make this flat in the bottom. Now there's a little plate that's going to fasten on the bottom, and some plans, simplest way is just to put it on there, put it on with screws, but I like to turn a little bit of a recess because I think that adding that little refinement makes it look a little bit nicer. The plans that come with this kit aren't much help because they call for doing your own drill. This has got a 1/4 inch hole, fits this just well. Some plans say 7/32, but I think a 1/4 inch is just right. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this to kind of center this on here. And to me, this is the easiest way to mark this because it's a little bit larger than a 7/8 inch drill bit, but it's a 7/8 Forstner bit. If we used a Forstner bit, would make it too wide. So I want to come just inside that line with a scraper or possibly a skew. See if we can get in here with this. We don't have to go very deep. Tailstock's getting in my way here. Let me slide it down. Yeah, because of the grind that I have here, it's flat here, but then it rotates across. I think I can just come in there with this just a little bit at a time. Don't even have to go down a 1/16 of an inch, actually. I have to consider how I want the students to do this, because this could be a kind of a tricky move for folks that aren't familiar with using a skew. But that works in there great. So that recess gives it just a nice polished look on assembly. All right. So now we could go ahead and start. I'm going to bring up tailstock. We can go ahead and do some shaping. Keep tailstock support as long as possible. And I'm going to switch to a 3/8 inch detail gouge and start rounding this over. So we're going to start on the corner with the flute at maybe 2 o'clock. Anchor the tool, ride the bevel, lift, and then swing. Lift, twist, and then swing this around. If you don't, you're going to get a bevel, or you're going to get a V-shaped, it's not going to look like a bead, it's going to be a wedge. And I'm not going to bring it all the way around, because my plan calls for a flat there. Just a bit of a flat. I've got a little bit more to go. I can still bring it around a little bit more. Start over here. And then we're going to have a bit of a start here. And going to cut away some of this waste wood. We're going to use this for another jam chuck later. So this is not going to hurt anything. More rounded here. And that gives us at least a start on the shape. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this loose, and because it's long enough, I think I can put some pressure on here and work it loose. Yep, without any problem. But the only reason I had to do it that way was in order to do that recess. If it wasn't for that, I could have turned that between centers. The other advantage is, I think, reducing the size of that tenon. It's a little better when this is secure on this end, because it holds when it comes through. Otherwise, you could have a problem. Or resort to a saw. That would work too. While I have this in place, I want to go ahead and change this to a jam chuck that we're going to use as a driver for this 1 5/8 inch. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just use some dividers, I think, here. I know people have warned me, said this is a terrible thing to show people, but you know, be careful with it. It touches here, it doesn't touch here. And then you just make sure that it matches, and you got it. Just don't touch both ends. There's a lot of things in wood turning that could be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't practice, but sometimes it pays to learn some of these techniques. They don't always be riding a tricycle with 3 wheels or a bicycle with training wheels, if that makes sense to you. Now, I'm going to use that as a successive approximation to, again, fit this. beginning to go on. Now, in order to be able to shape the bottom of this when it's jammed on there, and I bring this down, I want to give myself a little bit of room here. So I'm going to make this smaller than the bottom. So I've still got a nice driving surface, but I've got room to use this to shape this over. Okay. That makes sense. That's nice. Tap it on there good, so it's flush all the way around. Now we can go ahead and we can remount this if we want to shape this. For the time being, I think we'll probably go ahead and do that. Now we're going to turn this around. I could probably use a bigger, longer tool rest so I don't have to keep going back and forth. Okay, so now we're going to turn it around again using this anchor the tool, ride the bevel, lift until it cuts, move in the direction it cuts. Now, since we're starting with a kit that's got holes drilled, I want to show you what it looks like, how you would turn one where you have to drill the holes. So you turn this one piece, you're doing the mill head, you're bringing down the tenon on it, bringing it down a little bit more where you're going to part it off. Notice the tenons. I have a tenon at the top and the bottom of what will be the base, and also the top of what's going to be the mill head. And that allows me that when I do part it off, I can chuck it up on both sides in order to do that drilling, because you're going to drill halfway to each side. Now we're back to refining that shape, smoothing it off just a little bit, making it round. Ride the bevel. I've got this on my hip. Got its support on the tool rest, and then we're just going to just slowly take this smoothing cut at a bit of an angle by just shifting my body, not really using my hands except to hold the tool. Just roll over to the left. And nice and nice cylinder. Perfectly round. Bring this up a little bit tighter. Okay, now we're going to, again, using our storyboard. I got two different designs. I got a design on one side and a design on the other. This is the design I'm going to use. We're going to come in right here and take a cut that's going to just go down at about a 45-degree angle. We're going to have the base fairly flat, but at the base we're going to have, actually I'm going to use the storyboard. So I quickly mark the storyboard, the key features, and then I'm going to refine the base. I find that I can't do it with the mill head on, so I remove the mill head, bring up the tailstock support, 60-degree cone into that hole, and then I should start refining the shape a little bit. Anchor the tool, ride the bevel, move in the direction of the cut. Notice on this rollover, I've got to start swinging my handle out. Otherwise, I'm just going to get a wedge shape and not a nice round, smooth cut. Now I remove the tailstock. I bring up the mill head again because it needs a little bit of refinement, and I also want to see how it fits with that cut below the mill head. So I start shaping the top again. With that cone center, this works fairly well. For inexperienced or novice turners, sometimes having a wooden
cone there. Gives you a little sense of comfort in that you don't have to worry about getting your high-speed steel into that cone center. But you just bring it around, and here's a more dramatic example where I really have to swing that handle all the way out. Otherwise I'm going to get a flat there instead of a round, because it swings faster and faster as you get down that curve. Now I start marking the thinnest part. I'm using roughly a rule of thirds, about 1/3, 2/3. So I'm marking the thinnest area. Got to be careful not to get it too thin. The hole is 1 inch. I'm using a beating and parting tool to take it down to, gives me a wall thickness of maybe a 1/4 inch or so. Take a couple of parts so the tool doesn't bind. Then I'm going to go back to the spindle rough and gouge and get those nice flowing curves. The spindle rough and gouge really excels not only rounding off spindles, but also taking these nice flowing curves on a spindle on something like pepper mills and tool handles. It just does a great job for that. Just ease it into that flat. Come up under that lip in the other direction. Anchor the tool, ride the bevel, lift till it cuts. Move the flute in the direction of the cut. It's easy to get into a scraping mode when you're a novice turner using conventional tools, but you want to ride that bevel, smooth cut, or maybe more appropriately float the bevel, because if it was completely riding it, you wouldn't have the tool edge cutting. So there's going to be a little bit of air at the very back, a little bit of daylight coming in from both directions and refining it. And now I double check it with some calipers, realize I need to bring it down a little bit more to give that little bit drama on that big cove there. So I come back with a spindle gouge. Now I'm actually using a beating and parting tool. I'm using a beating and parting tool to take that big bead down near the bottom. This is a great tool for that. Easy to roll it over. This bead's not going to be proud. It's going to be actually even with the surface on each side, and then I'm going to bring that cut in on each side. Then I cut in from each side, kind of roll it over, kind of a half a bead, so to speak, on each side. Just smooth off any flat spots. This almost works like a skew. Now I switch back to a spindle gouge to refine that large asymmetrical cove a little bit. Again, deep coves add drama to your pieces, and you want to have a continuous curve. And I check it and go back and do a little more refining. Pick it up right there, just above that bead.
For those of y'all that are fairly new at this, it probably is worthwhile me mentioning a few sanding tips. Number one, use the coarser 120 grit until all your tool marks are gone before you move up. And then you're going to go up to 180 grit, and then 220, 240, and then 320, and that ought to be where you could probably stop. I use a sanding lubricant. If you're not familiar with that, I'll have a link to a video here. But it gives you a nice smooth surface. It runs cooler, and most of all, it allows you to breathe better because it absorbs all these little fine dust particles. It traps it in a slurry. Don't round over the crisp edges, so be very careful when you're coming around. You want to make sure you keep that crisp edge, because it's the crisp edge on these spindle projects that really make a difference. So coming this way, come off, but don't roll over. Same thing about the beads down here. We're going to take just a little crisp edge off the bottom corner here. Not rounding it over, just knocking off the crisp edge. And so here you come down in there and then roll it back. You could use a V, fold it in half. If you want to keep that nice crisp detail at the bottom on that bead on each side. Here's the plate at the bottom in that little recess with these two screws. You use a 1/16 inch drill bit, and you can see how much cleaner that is with a recess. Putting this thing together, the final assembly is easy. The instructions are quite clear on how you put the parts together. It is not rocket surgery. You slide it in. It goes up through that plate, and then it's held at the bottom by a retaining ring that you use again a couple of 1/16 inch screw holes to hold it. Now here's the only tricky part, is getting it sized just the right length for you to be able to tighten this up and use this to adjust the grind. And as it turns out, I did mine exactly the right height, so it doesn't need any adjustment. But let's say I had it and it was too long. Then all you need to do is use one of the longer kits. Cut it off the appropriate height with a hacksaw, and then peen the bottom with a hammer by holding this in a vise. Not a very difficult trick. And it ought to be easy enough for me to do in class, because it's going to be difficult for the students to get these sizes exactly right. So I just marked where it needs to be cut. Use a hacksaw. This is soft aluminum, so it cuts very easily. Didn't even have to have a vise. Of course, having a sharp blade wouldn't hurt. There we go. Now we're going to turn around. We're going to put it in the vise like this. Tighten it up. And again, because it is soft aluminum, we're just going to take a hammer and peen around the edges. You're doing is bending it over a little bit so it won't come through the plate at the bottom. Just a little bit of peening. And you can see it doesn't take a lot of peening. It's not even a 64th of an inch. I don't. Maybe a 32nd of an inch peened over, and it won't come through. So that'll work just fine. For those of y'all with experience in pepper mills, feel free to leave a comment or a tip below. Y'all stay safe. Come on back here.